Thank you for taking the time to do this. Your series is riveting. It is so timely. Many of us around the country have become junkies to news, but what you gave us is far beyond news. You've empowered us, you've exposed, you've enlightened, and we thank you. So I'm going to get to it right into it. A lot of people say that when you're making a documentary that has social impact, you have to start with the issues that you're trying to change. This series, first and foremost, touches so many of us at our core. What was the catalyst that brought you two together to make this series?
Yeah, I can take that. First of all, thank you to UCSB and the Carsey-Wolf Center and Wendy for moderating. We're really happy to be here. Just a little bit of backstory of how this came to be. I actually, in 2013, I was working on another PBS series called Makers, and I was doing the Women in Politics episode. And at that point, I actually met Rashida Tlaib, who was then a state representative from Michigan. And, you know, it really struck me to meet her because it was the first time I actually met a politician who I felt, you know, I would want to represent me. She was, you know, really accessible, down to earth. She was the daughter of immigrants like me from the Midwest, like me. She was also, you know, mom of young kids and was really rooted in her community. And I sort of remembered her, you know, sort of thought about her and what she stood for many years when in 2016, our other producer, Jyoti Sarda, had approached me about potentially working on something related to women in politics. And this is the year that we thought we might have our first woman president. That didn't happen, but, you know, for all these, you know, as we watch like demographics quickly shifting, and I've always made work about communities of color, women, immigrants, it just seemed the time to tell a story about women of color in politics and, you know, sort of using the lens of race and gender to talk about, you know, an American political story. Jyoti's not a filmmaker, so I knew that this would be a really ambitious project and I needed another filmmaking brain on the team with me. And so I called Marge and luckily she said yes. Hand it off to you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, you know, it was like a balm, right? To receive a call in a time when so many of us were just feeling completely hopeless and, you know, like there was no end in sight. We were just sort of at the beginning of this journey and, you know, what would happen. And to come from communities, you know, we all come from communities. I'm from Iran, which, you know, Trump was talking about prior to his election. So it just felt like from a personal perspective, something that would keep me sane, but also with a real recognition that we don't and we should never underestimate the importance of seeing reflections of ourselves in images that are filled with power and brilliance on our screens. We don't get to see that enough. Certainly in documentary, we don't get to see that enough. And you know, we have a field that has problems of its own with diversity and representation and how stories are told. And so it just seemed like the perfect kind of combo of what the world could do with what was personally kind of healing, and also an opportunity for us to kind of push back a little bit against the documentary system, and show how something ambitious and big and, you know, with a big budget and kind of real scope could be pulled off by a team of women of color, so that we can just kill that sort of dead-end argument that we hear over and over again and move forward.
And I need to piggyback on that, which is another question. You know, I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia. And so often Georgia is the #1 place to do business for motion pictures and TV. And so many times you get the question, well, they're not, or you get the statement, there are not enough women of color. We don't know where to find them. This is a big film. There's a lot of women involved, and you guys grabbed the best of the best. How hard was that to find?
It was easy because, you know, we've been in these circles for many years. what we did was, because it was such an ambitious project, we wanted diversity both geographically, ethnically, age-wise. We wanted to find candidates who ran the gamut from, Stacey Abrams running for a historic governor's seat in Georgia to Bushra Amiwala, 20-year-old college student running for a local county supervisor seat. So we needed help. And so we reached out to, our friends who are all accomplished documentary film directors in this lane, looking at issues of politics, social justice, race, community, history, all of these things. And we just asked them if they wanted to, participate. And everybody said yes. It was a no-brainer. The bigger job was, putting it all together. I mean, we had field directors who sort of closely matched the communities from which, where we were filming. Of course, Marjan and I also, did some, we're in the field as well. But, it was really important for us to, tell the stories it helped us gain access and trust very quickly with the people that we were filming with, not just candidates, but also the organizers that we document.
It makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you for answering that question to those that are out there that don't think there's a lot of women of color that can do this type of project. We did. Now watch.
We do. Actually, if I can just say one more thing, Wendy, it's, we know these people, but we're not the only people who know these people. There's tons, there's just tons. There's tons of super talented women, men, people of color, immigrants, undocumented filmmakers. There's just tons of us. And we have been organizing in our own communities now for years. And when people say things like, you can't find women of color who are qualified, or I don't know, a Black, whatever, it's a reflection of how disconnected they are.
Yes.
It's not a reflection of a lack of talent in our communities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. With that said, we live in a culture that we use visual images that will power, and that means filmmaking can be a force of positive change, but it also comes as a big responsibility. So as filmmakers, what weighed the most upon you in making this series?
Gosh, I wish we'd had the time as we were making it to sit and have these kind of deep reflections. It was really crazy. It was super hectic to pull off. I mean, we knew we would be able to do justice to the stories. We knew the thinking was right, the team was right. I think what maybe weighed heavily on us is the chance that the system, the kind of gatekeepers and all that would not get it. And, we'd lose the opportunity. And, I think we landed in some kind of midway space. There was a lot of gatekeepers who didn't get it, who said things like, well, who's going to find stories about women of color interesting? Or isn't this just a smaller story in the bigger story about women? Or you guys aren't really qualified to kind of handle this kind of budget, or whatever, all that kind of stuff that we spend a lot of time listening to. At the same time, there were some very bold kind of funders, private individuals, foundations who got it instantly and believed and kind of made it possible. So I think probably what weighed most heavily on us was to make sure that we delivered something that, was true to what we set out to do, that authentically represented these women, and that we didn't participate in limiting our own possibility because the system wanted to limit it for us.
Oh, yes.
I often say that working on this project was akin to working on our own political campaign, because right now everyone talks about women of color. Joe Biden, is his VP pick going to be a Black woman, et cetera. But back in 2017, 2018, nobody was really talking about it. We now see in hindsight that everybody we filmed with are now these historic characters, in Congress, or, even Stacey Abrams, who did not win her race because it was stolen. She is a force, right? And I think, for us at the time, it's convincing people, why is this a story? Why should we look at American politics through a lens of race and gender? Why don't we just look at it through gender, right? This was something that we unequivocally stuck a stake in the ground and said, this is important. You can't talk about politics in this moment without looking at both, and many other elements as well. And then even just the, looking at the organizers, right? We didn't want to make an election or a campaign film because we knew that would be limiting in terms of time. It would be, it would no longer be topical after 2018 election. And so it was important to see this as a historic movement moving forward. And, you know, it's playing out in 2020. It's going to resonate in 2024, 2022, 2024. So we wanted to get in on the beginning of, it's not even the beginning, it's just this moment that happened in 2018.
So even when you found your story making, I know making films, complex issues that resonate with people often reveal a challenge. And in 2018, there were so many women of color around the nation running for political offices on the local, state, and federal levels. How did you choose your characters?
So we started with a pretty robust research process. You know, there were many women running, but unfortunately there isn't like some handy list that you can Google, which just lists them out for you and makes it easy. So, so instead what we decided, we thought about what it's important to us to have and use that as a filter mechanism. So part of that is what Grace was saying. It's, you know, we really wanted geographic, ethnic diversity, big seats, large seats, and small. We wanted women who were not kind of, they didn't wake up the day after Trump was elected and decide, I'm going to get in politics. These are women who have been organizing and power building in community for their whole lives. And that the evolution of power is to step into governance. Right. So those were, I mean, some of them, you know, we knew, I mean, Stacey was like a no-brainer, right? That was such a historic race, you know, that was a no-brainer. Right. But then also like Busher became a no-brainer the minute we met her because she's so dynamic. And I kept thinking about what was I doing when I was 19 years old? I was not in any way, shape or form prepared to do any of this, you know? And she was just so impressive. She challenged every stereotype that people have, you know, about young people, about Muslim girls, all of that, you know? And so they kind of self-identified. You know, the ones who wanted to, it's usually like this with documentary. Some are like, oh no, I don't want to have anything to do with the camera. And some people step forward because they understand that the story has longevity. It's not just that moment. It carries, you know, it ripples through for decades, you know? So yeah. Anything else, Grace, that we missed? Rashida, we knew because you had already had the relationship with her and she was so powerful.
Right. Yeah, I think, nope, nothing new. Yeah.
So this series feels very personal, which makes it feel a whole lot more compelling. It's very, the voices are all very authentic. And sometimes you don't want to be in messaging and storytelling. You don't want to be always so on the nose. It never felt like it was preaching. As directors, what did you have to do to make sure your vision came across without losing people?
Grace?
Well, I mean, I think this series is really personal. You know, I mean, we talk about the new American majority. We talk about changing demographics. You know, we talk about looking at politics, women of color in a way that's not just black and white. And, you know, as someone who has grown up in this, born and raised in the Midwest as an Asian American, it was important for me to see immigrants and Asians, you know, in this story. I mean, it's an inclusive story that's deeply personal to me, right? And also just that feeling that I had, you know, 2013 when I first met Rashida Tlaib as a state representative. I wanted to replicate that feeling because I think that is something I never imagined that there would be a politician who I actually would like, you know, or someone who I actually thought, oh, like that's interesting. Like that actually sort of switches on another idea of like what politics can be, what becoming civically engaged can be. And all of these women had that. And I think that's, you know, when we talk back to researching and casting, that was also something, you know, that was really, we knew that they would, you know, they were all very authentic to who they were, you know, able to just be who they were. Like there's a moment in the film you see Maria Elena Durazo, now state senator from Los Angeles, you know, somebody says, oh, there's a hot mic. She's like, I don't care. Like I want mic on or off, right? Like, I think that's, you know, these people are regular people. And I think that's one of the things that comes across. And I think that's always an appeal to me and the kinds of films I make, and Marge as well. So.
Yeah, I think also, Wendy, it comes back to the thing you asked earlier, which is that it matters who tells the stories, right? Every one of us, the storytellers, live an experience of feeling like an outsider, feeling like we're swimming against a stream. We've all been in rooms where we've been, the only one, or we've had to speak out when someone says something and correct, so we understand the experiences that these women have, because these are our experiences too, right? And so that's why when we talk in this field, or we talk in general about narrative power, this is why it matters, because it's the same story told by someone who's inside versus someone who's outside reflects completely differently in the final version.
Definitely. So getting this film in front of the right audience at the right time definitely was paramount. With so many elections, so many issues, how hard was it to find the ending to this story when we all know that the fight for women to be represented in positions of power seems never ending?
Well, we thought the story would end we were in this intense production stage for all of 2018, and we thought on November 6th or whatever it was, we're going to be done.
We're going to sleep on the 7th.
Georgia, and then it wasn't done. It just kept going, just the suppression and trying to figure out people getting their votes counted, their voices counted, and that's not something we envisioned. We knew voter suppression would be a thing, but we didn't realize it would be the thing, and it's the thing now as well. I forgot the beginning of your question, but
well, I'll just pick up a bit. So we also wanted to film in 2019 a little bit as well, because I think that it's one thing to campaign for office and win a seat. It's another thing to then become, walk into those halls of power and have to then be the only person in that space, right? Or one of the handful of people in that space, and what is all the incoming that comes with that. And, because it took us a long time to edit, so the news kept unfolding while we were, in the process of editing. And to see the way that the squad were kind of targeted, very directly by Trump, and all this go home, and then what happened in El Paso and Veronica's district, with the horrible massacre rooted in racism. We just knew that we had to sort of tell these stories, because they were the kind of culmination, right? They were the sort of the denouement of the arc of that these women had sort of set up. But we also didn't want to leave us all bummed out, because those things are really, they're devastating, and they happen, they happen a lot. They happen too often. So how did we, the end, does have a little moment of hope. I also want to tip our hat to our extraordinary editor, Julie Vitsa. It's doubtful that we would have found an ending without Julie's help. Just managing, I think we ended up with 400 or 500 hours of footage. And so cutting that down and being able to sort of find the complex narrative arc, right? Because it's 7 people's narrative arcs. So Julie was really there's no way this would have come to life in the way it did without Julie's help.
You mentioned Stacey Abrams' race and how that ended. As you know, I was in Atlanta, and I have never felt more deflated in that moment, politically, outside of 2016, and we hope to right that wrong. In episode 1, and you guys are in the room, you know what's going on. I know you're keeping track of the numbers, and at the same time, Lucy MacBeth was running her election as well. You had so many things going on, but Stacey was being watched nationally. That was going to be a huge game changer for the nation. Personally, I know you all were covering it, but personally, can you share what you were feeling at that moment when you knew that, oh God, this is not the end?
It was a very weird night, as I recall. I feel like my memory has done me the service of blocking a bunch of it. Well, we were all in different places, right? Because we were following, there was Stacey's story, there was Lucy's story, and we were with NSA and New Georgia Project as well. So we were divided from each other that night. I feel like we maybe went to bed around 4 a.m., something like that, 5 a.m. And there was a moment where we kind of all reconnected, having been in these bubbles, and we're like, what happened on your side, I don't think that we knew that it ended, because it was this kind of, it just kept going, right? Especially in, Lucy's race wasn't decided until 2 days after either, right? Because the votes weren't counted. But I do remember, I think the next day it was pouring with rain, as I recall, and we all just took a beat. And then the next day were our flights. And I remember we were sitting at Ria's Bluebird having our last shrimp and grits with like, you know, like our whole crew finally, everyone in one place. And I was just like, wait, we actually can't leave. It would be crazy to leave, right? And I remember just going and sitting, they have a little bench outside and getting on Airbnb. We'd given up our house. Everything was packed in the suitcase in the back of the car, you know, and I just like booked another Airbnb and we stayed, you know, because it just didn't end. So, I mean, I think it was, for me, that moment of like absolute despair was in the Capitol protest, you know, which was some 5-6 days after. And that was, you know, I literally get goosebumps when I think about being in that space and, you know, what happened there. For those who haven't seen yet, I won't spoil it too much, but, you know, there was a protest in the People's House, a peaceful protest, a building in which you have to pass through metal detectors to come into. There's not a risk of any kind. Peacefully, people asking for votes to be counted. And there was an assault on these gathered bodies, and it was really aggressive. And anyway, so that for me was like the kind of breathtaking moment where it just felt like the system is not going to let this pass, you know? So, yeah. I think also Rashida's night was also a very big one, right, for you, Grace?
Right. I mean, but that ended in a victory.
That did end in a victory, but a long night also, right?
It was also very long, but yeah.
So one of my favorite, I thought it was so illuminating. And I know you guys canvassed. Canvasses is a lot of hard work for those that have never done it. The phone calling, which I actually did as well on behalf of Stacey Abrams, the entire Democratic slate. But one of the things I loved was you all were in the community, and the lady talked. She shares the story of knocking on the door of a white family, and the woman comes to the door, and her looming MAGA husband is there. And although she let you all know that she voted, you know, we're a Republican household, I thought it was very telling for her to say, you know, we've looked how she voted in her household to maintain peace. She's maybe Republican to her husband, but in the polls, when she gets behind that and has her opportunity to cast her vote, that she had casted Democrat, that was telling. That was so telling. Did you have any other stories like that in other places?
I mean, I think that was specifically around Lucy MacBeth, right? And I think Lucy was such an interesting story, because it's very hard for women to come to terms with the normalization of their children being killed, you know, by guns, right? And so whatever your kind of family shell looks like, Lucy's ability to connect with human beings is kind of extraordinary, right? And she may not be the world's most polished, and she's much more polished now than she was when she first started running. She's not like a politician, right? She's a mom. But her ability, because she went through the terrible trauma in her family and had to tell and retell that story for so many years, her ability to just pierce through all of that. So I feel like this groundswell of women for whom it was like a silent act of rebellion against the vote, you know, the election of Trump, essentially, right? To sort of in their own subversive way within their own homes, just do like, you know what, no, you know? And I think that group of women, that, you know, sort of that's what they sort of really represent. And I think it's fascinating. You know, I think about the things that I couldn't tolerate in a marriage. I don't think I could tolerate a political chasm like that in my partner, right? We can make our way through a lot of things, but I just couldn't, like, I don't know how I could live with that. So I tip my hat to those women for being able to sort of keep their cover in those homes, you know?
It definitely couldn't fly in my household.
Well, your household is, yeah.
For sure. You know, one of the things I loved as well, I loved so many things, and we could do this for hours, but unfortunately we're limited. But you guys, you know, you had several stories moving simultaneously, and often journalism, news media only provides a snapshot, right, of an issue. And your series lends itself to telling deeper stories about women. Were there any B or C storylines that troubled you so much you couldn't look away, filmed it, but had to leave it on the cutting room floor? And if so, can you share them with us?
Grace, you want to take that, or you want me to do it?
So the question is, were there stories that we
loved but left behind?
Loved and left behind.
All right. Well, you know, one of the stories that we did, one of the candidates that we did do a little bit of filming with was Deb Haaland, who was one of the first Native American women elected to Congress. And because we started late, and also because we had limited access, we didn't have the kind of strong material, as strong material as we had with the other women. And also we only had 3.5 hours to tell this entire story. So unfortunately we weren't able to, you have to make some hard decisions sometimes when you're putting the film together or the series together. But we actually are, using some of that footage to make a short film about Deb that we're going to release, that can be used up to the, leading up to November. To start the dialogue, because, we were talking about a movement of women of color, and it was very painful for us to not be able to include her story. But yeah, that's one of the things that happens to filmmakers all the time. You have to let go of certain things. Yeah.
Right. Were there any scenes that you felt personally that you were tied to in an edit that you knew it was going to push the audience beyond their comfort zone? There were many times I cried, but personally, what were the scenes for you as directors that say, you know what, this is going to push it?
I mean, first of all, we're 100% in the lane of pushing people out of their comfort zone. So we are down with that. We are good with that idea, right? This whole thing, if we don't push out of our collective comfort zones, we will never achieve, a different vision, right? And so pushing out of the comfort zone was kind of like in our DNA in this project. Mm-hmm. But if I think about scenes there's so many, right? Like we still choke up, watching Rashida win, watching her mother come rushing in to wrap her, and to think, it's there in the film. Rashida is the eldest of 14 children. Just think about that, right? With a mother who doesn't speak fluent English, and to have built from her grandmother, who literally was illiterate, came to this country illiterate, to then her granddaughter to become the first Muslim woman elected to our Congress is extraordinary, right? And so if this isn't in fact the very American dream that we all believe in, then I don't know what is. So I think we all feel that, and like I said earlier, we all know what it's like to I well up with pride. I'm not a Palestinian woman, but I well up with pride when I see her mother wrap her in the Palestinian flag, because there's so much loaded into the sort of exclusion, right? And that there's that one moment of kind of thing, bliss. So for me, I think that's a big emotional wallop in the film. Where else do we cry, Grace? We cry a lot.
When Bushra loses her election, but here's this young woman who put everything into it, and has so much poise and maturity, and like she is powerful, right? And just to see that she can do that at 20 is really, I'm moved thinking about it right now, and just to see how she motivated like her younger siblings and her family. They're also immigrants. What do they know? They were just sort of following because they're just supporting their daughter. They're doing whatever they can to help her push forward and do what she needs to do to be her whole self, right? That's just moving. It's just like moving as a family story, like a personal story.
And seeing Lucy with, at Jordan's grave, like the touchstone of going back to Jordan, and how the loss of Jordan, and a literally unimaginable loss, has ended up shaping such a new narrative in her life, right? And these are really powerful themes, right? They're like big themes of sort of David and Goliath type themes, right? And I think
he says something like, you know, the worst thing possible has ever happened to me. I'm not afraid of anything, right?
Right.
Losing her son. She can
Mhm.
take on anybody, right? So these are really emotional, really like deeply personal stories that they are willing to put out there. And I think that's why we're so moved and why we're so engaged with them, you know, trying to.
And also, this is why they win. This is how they win, because they come to us not as someone up on a stage that is untouchable and unlike us. It's like Grace has said multiple times now, when you feel seen, like you feel like I share story with you. And that is a revolutionary idea when we are redefining, they are redefining what does a politician look like?
Yes. Yes.
And that's profound. It's like profound, you know? So there's one other thing I just want to bring in. I know we're going to run out of time in a minute, Wendy, so I want to make sure we get to it, which is that the sort of the other character, right? So we have like candidates, we have organizers, but the other really important character in this story of this moment, and also of our film, is the new American majority, right? Like this is why it's this perfect storm of elements coming together in this moment, right? And the idea of this new American majority, the idea that all of us who have always spent our time feeling like the one or the outsider or the I don't belong, now we are about to be the majority. And if we can effectively link arms and understand that while there are differences between your culture and my culture and Grace's culture, there is much more that we collectively share in the fight, right? Absolutely. And that when we add us all together, now we're a really powerful force. And I think that part of our goals is with the project in general, yes, you know, support women of color, the leadership of women of color is important, but also we have power, right? And democracy is based on this, on the demos, on the people, right? Yeah. And I think that our political system speaks of democracy, but in fact, as we see over and over and over again, it isn't really designed to fully engage you. It doesn't sort of suck you in. It's actually quite a difficult system to penetrate, right? The language is complicated, the forms are complicated, the process is like not clear. And so it's designed to make us feel like we should just give up. And I think that was one of the things, back to aha moments for voter suppression for me, is that you could still end up voting in the end. But that doesn't mean they didn't make every attempt to make that as difficult as humanly possible for you, yes. Right? Like it's a spectrum. The idea of voter suppression is a spectrum. And philosophically, as a country, we should ask ourselves, do we want everyone to participate in democracy? And if so, how do we make this as easy and clear and accessible as possible? Or do we not actually want everyone to participate? And how do we build a system that makes it very, very difficult and challenging for people? We're about to go into a situation with COVID. It's extraordinary to think about it, right? And we all saw the tweets this morning. I mean, the fragility of our democracy, that we are literally like, it's here right in our hands and we have a few months. Forget what party you vote for. Like, do you believe in the idea of democracy? And so I think for us, that element of people power, like, see and understand your real power, right? And learn how to use it. Find a group of people to walk with, to be in a political home with, and don't let the system that's designed to silence you actually silence you.
Oh, very true. Another big scene, and we're going to get ready to take some questions. Where, you know, this morning, President Trump went on a tear against mail-in voting. In a pair of tweets, he claimed that mail-in voting was rife and an easily target for foreign election interference. You know, there's a scene where I think it's Veronica Escobar, and they go to the wall, and they allowed the passage of families to be able to hug each other. Did you all did you know that was going to happen? Was that, oh wow. What did that feel like? I have to, I sobbed and I sobbed and I sobbed, and I can't imagine what it's like to be torn from your family. But as you all were covering it, were you two? I know you had a lot of people on the ground, but
yeah, we weren't there. That was Deb Eskenazi, who's a Latina documentary filmmaker who lives in Texas, who was covering Veronica's story. It's an event that happens. I think we went to we filmed the 5th ever one. It's becoming increasingly difficult to organize. And basically, you know, they open the border fence and, you know, just beyond the fence is the actual border. And so the Americans are still on the American side and the Mexicans are still on the Mexican side. And they literally hug across this imaginary line, right?
3 minutes.
For 3 minutes, and then they sound this horn, and the thing is you have to move along, because if you don't, all the other people who are waiting to hug also for 3 minutes don't get to hug. I mean, imagine what we are doing to families. And I mean, one of the things that Veronica says over and over again is that these two cities of El Paso and Juarez are sister cities, right? Like there's, you know, they're really one, they call themselves a binational city. It's just an extraordinary, the devaluation of human life,
right,
is something that we really have to take a minute and absorb. It's not just politics. It's a true dehumanization of human life. And we have to ask ourselves, are we okay with that? And if we're not, what are we going to do about it?
Yes. Well, we're going to take, there's some questions out there. One question, why did you feel it was so important to focus not just individual candidates, but rather on the larger organizational networks around them? And was there any story about the value of community organizations that emerged during production that you found especially telling or illuminating?
Grace, you want to take that?
I mean, I alluded to it before, you know, we didn't want to make an election or a campaign film. You know, plenty of people have done that in the past. We really wanted to look at this movement, and the movement is not just candidates who are at the top of the ticket or looking, you know, the face of on the ballot. It's really the people who are the hidden labor, you know, the hidden figures of these campaigns, community organizers, people who are, you know, your neighbors who are helping you to get out to vote. I mean, I think that's where the participation part of democracy comes into play. And we really wanted to show that because, you know, somebody like Enze Ufat from the New Georgia Project, I mean, she is a force of nature as well, like trying to, you know, they are registering hundreds of thousands of voters who just have felt disengaged and not reflected in the system. And that is a huge, you know, that is a huge effort that we wanted to also shine a light on. What else?
I was just thinking of I mean, one of the things that always makes me sort of really profoundly moved is Tanya from Mi Gente.
Oh, yeah.
You know, when you see undocumented people, it's hot in Georgia, right? Like it's hot.
Yes.
It's like long days in the heat, knocking doors. Door knocking is thankless, tiring work, you know? And to see undocumented people who have lived here their whole lives, essentially, right? Fight so hard to make sure that everyone else can vote, because they literally can't. They don't get a say. But what they can do is make sure that you get a say, right? And for me, that is such a moving, if that isn't like democracy in action, you know, I don't know what is. So that was very illuminating from the organizers. But then also like Cam, the Vietnamese woman who sort of organizes, and she's not like a professional organizer in the sense that she's not, you know, paid by an organization. It's not her job to do it. But, you know, immigrant communities, we understand how to organize with each other. That's how we've survived. That's how we've like grown as communities. So just all of them to be so committed to this idea is really inspiring, right? And then you look at them and you're like, well, if this is what it looks like to organize, it also demystifies it. You know, I can do that. I can take 5 friends and go for an afternoon and do that, you know? So, yeah, they're just very inspiring. They're the engines. There's literally no way to win an election without organizers being there to move the people. And we don't understand that clearly enough, I don't think, in American politics.
Another question someone had was, did you try to interview any of the opponents of your subject, such as Brian Kemp?
Negative.
We tried.
No, actually, that's true. We did send a couple of press requests to his press office. They didn't get answered. We wanted to center the power of women of color. The story that we were telling wasn't like is he going to win? Is she going to win? I mean, it's part of the narrative arc, but that's not the story. The story is about a lack of reflective leadership that looks like the country and sees the troubles of the country. And we wanted to center that. We didn't want to, we really wanted to center that. Even in the small exchange, like there's a scene where there's a guy who takes on Stacey about her tax debt that she had at the time. And, the focus of that story should not be him. The focus of that story should be the extraordinary political prowess of saying, yeah, I have debt.
Mm-hmm.
Like millions of other Americans, I have debt.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that is such a brave thing for her to have done.
Yes.
And it was so powerful because literally you see all these people who are like, yeah, I'm paying my dad's medical bills too. And I don't know how to make ends meet and something's got to give, This is why they have their power. So we didn't really want to, our job was not to center a story around, those voices. We wanted to center the women of color. We did go to Kemp's rally, though, and there's a good little scene in there.
Yes. Was that one in Macon?
I think it was in Macon.
Oh.
Yeah. It's amazing what you can catch at these events.
or the people you see.
Yes.
That maybe I'm like, I never in a million years. I saw a vendor, the African-American vendor,
Mm-hmm.
husband and wife couple, Black.
Yeah.
And
You see them everywhere.
They were selling MAGA hats, and I was like, is this really happening?
Yes, it's happening.
We do have a few more questions. One person says, I'm interested in the way the candidates repeatedly talk about their use of makeup. Can you talk about why this thread was interesting to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Did a woman ask that question or a man? I'm guessing a woman asked that question.
I don't know. Not as to me.
I mean, I think this is the thing, right? Like a man who runs for office, I'm going to generalize for a minute, but a man who runs for office has to have a couple of suits, right? A comb,
mm-hmm. and essentially that's it. Out the door, on the way, not worrying about who's taking care of the kids, who's feeding the kids tonight, what, did the homework get done? Did they get to their, dentist appointment? A woman has all these invisible barriers, right, to just sort of get to that same place. And whether we like it or not, the women are judged based on their appearances all the time in our culture, right? And so there's a moment where Bushra is criticized by a man who tells this young girl, don't wear so much lipstick next time. And worse, she internalizes it and wears less lipstick, right? And then on the other hand, you've got Maria Elena, who's like, I always put on my lippy sticky. I mean, now Grace and I, when we're doing an event, we're like, don't forget your lippy sticky, So, I mean, it's just, you got to acknowledge there are these realities about being a woman, And so I don't think we really sort of wanted to focus on it in some kind of central way, but it is a real thing. You got to get your hair done. You got to, and if you don't, you just get attacked for that, and nobody's listening to your ideas anymore, And I think that's another thing we need to question. Are we okay with that? Right.
I mean, I would just say too, Bushra's really into makeup. I mean, that's true. She likes putting on makeup, and she, she's into it, right? She looks at YouTube tutorials and stuff. We didn't make that into a thing. She's a young woman who cares about it. So
I have to ask this question because I did canvas a lot, and there was, for those of you that don't know, Atlanta is a blue city inside of a really red state. Were there ever any times that you or your crew felt threatened while you were following someone? I had an incident personally in, I think it's Jenkinsville, Georgia, somewhere in between Macon and Atlanta, where these guys start firing off guns while we were canvassing, knock on doors, and don't have to tell me twice. I know how to get out. Did anyone on your crew ever experience anything that they felt was life-threatening?
Not towards the crew, but they often were filming while that happened to a canvasser, right? So this was a very common occurrence, whether it was the Asians, for Abrams, or it was the kids from New Georgia Project, people calling the cops, you don't look like you belong in this neighborhood, harassment, which again is a form of suppression, right? It's like, that is, giving people information about, an upcoming election is not a crime, The Trump rally, we also went and filmed the Trump rally. That didn't make the cut. And I was a bit worried actually about sending them. Our field director who did a lot of the Georgia story is Yoruba Rich, and she's a very tall, very dark-skinned African-American woman. Our director of photography is a Pakistani immigrant. And I was like, should I find some white folk to go film the Trump rally, But they were determined. They were like super into going and checking it out, So
it's not just white people at a Trump rally. I mean,
no, that's right. They've done right. Not by any measure. Yeah.
What is your plans for the film? Beyond PBS, and how can other organizations engage with you to continue to spread the message?
Sure. So it's streaming for free until the end of August, which is one of the fantastic things about public television. So that you can find that on andshecouldbenext.com. You can find it on your PBS app, on your smart TV, or on the PBS website. It is also currently available for purchase at Amazon and iTunes. And maybe like Comcast, a couple of the digital providers. We sort of put a lot of energy into the lead up to the broadcast and making a lot of noise. We're now really pivoting into the impact piece of our work. We want to make really sure that people from the New American Majority are able to go vote and understand how important it is, right? And I think we're here under the auspices of a college, it's unclear what's happening with, kids who are in university. It's unclear if they're going physically back, if they're not going physically back. Are they registered there? Are they registered back at home? Do they need to re-register? What does that look like? Like, these are the myriad ways in which, I think when we think about voter suppression, we sometimes think about it as like one, like, let's just take this whole, elections poll site out and chuck it in a ditch, right? But it's not. It's an entire system of very small, knock off a couple of hundred here, knock off a couple of thousand there. So that's the work we're doing now, is to engage with organizations, engage with the sort of target audiences, the ones who will feel seen and don't engage, right? And to try to sort of push that sector to engage, right? And again, it doesn't matter which way you're going to go vote. You get to go vote whichever way you do. That is also protected. But it is important that you participate, So what else are we doing, Grace? It's possible to book it for community screenings. There's a shorter sample of the front. We're going to provide educational tools for conversation, dialogue.
Follow us on social media and She Could Be Next on Instagram and Twitter, Facebook. We're going to start rolling out more tools and things like that, but you can already access that now if you go to the website.
And there's actually a bunch of great conversations that we've had, and not just us, but a lot of really powerful women that are all housed on our Facebook page and our YouTube page as well.
We thank you so much on behalf of Carsey-Wolf Center and all of us at University of California, Santa Barbara. We thank you for taking the time. We know that time is money. There's a lot of things that you could be doing this evening, but you chose to spend it with us, and we're very, very grateful for it.
We're very happy to have been here, and thank you everyone for tuning in.
Thank you, everyone.